This is a video about writing the summary assignment. This is the first high stakes assignment in the course. It's worth 10% of your grade. Only has to be 400 words long, but don't let the length deceive you. As I say in the assignment, and I'll explain a few of the components here, writing summaries are harder than most people think. I'm assuming, perhaps correctly or incorrectly, that most of you have never written a summary before, but you've certainly encountered them. Reviews are perhaps the most obvious forms of summary. Movie reviews, restaurant reviews, book reviews. Those are all summaries that tell you what happened. It's not the original, but it's someone's version of the original. But reviews are usually recommendations. That is, they make judgments about the original piece. This summary assignment is not asking you to judge the piece. It's not asking you to say, this is a super thing or this is a terrible thing. No judgment, okay? So it's meant to be an objective summary. So we can see very quickly that summaries might have different rationales as to why they might be written. So for this, what I'm essentially testing you on, or looking for, as it were, is how well did you understand the original piece? Did you understand everything that's going on? I'm not interested whether you agree with the piece or disagree with the piece. I'm interested whether or not you understood what the original author is saying. So I'm asking you to take a longer piece and boil it down. And therein lies the difficulty, is that I'm asking you to reduce the size of the original piece without reducing the complexity of the piece. Now that's an ideal that can't actually be achieved, but it's the principle that you're working on, that you want to simplify without oversimplifying, and that can be a difficult balancing act. So in terms of actually writing the summary, there's one thing that you should think about from the outset, is that I'm going to put up a little graphic here, that you've got the original and you've got the summary, and I want you to begin your summary with what you think is this thesis statement of the original piece. Now, whether or not the original piece has an explicit thesis statement is open to question. Depends on the piece that you are writing about. But don't comb over the original and say, oh yes, this is the thesis right here, but rather get a sense of the whole. And if you go back to what a thesis statement means, it's an argument with evidence. Okay? So what is the original argument and what is the evidence? Now, when you state the evidence, it doesn't have to be the specific examples, but you should think about the kinds of evidence that appear in the work. Is it examples? Is it statistics? Is it personal life experience? Is it logic? Okay? And say, so-and-so makes a logical argument about this particular subject. Okay? So in your opening sentence or two of the summary, you should begin with a statement of the author's full name as it appears on the piece, the title of the piece. So if you were writing on Laura Robinson's Girl Unprotected, you would say, in Laura Robinson's article or essay, Girl Unprotected, in quotation marks, she makes the argument that such and such. And if you go back to the example in the textbook, you'll see that it follows that line of composition. Okay? Then, after you have that introductory sentence or two, which is the original summarized down to a thesis statement, summary of the summary, okay? That's where you begin with the thesis. Follow that with the progression of the original article. Where does it start? How does it progress? And where does it end? Okay? And here's where you want to be attentive to the compositional methods of the original. Maybe the person has a very linear approach to the subject material, that they start at A and they move through B, C, D, and they end up at E. Maybe they jump around, okay? Maybe they work backwards, okay? So think about the organization. So there's a lot of dimensions at play in writing a summary that most of us, I would think, when we when we read a piece, we focus on content. What is this actually saying? And content's great, it's super important, right? It's the most important thing, arguably. But also the form, how it's said, is important. And that's why I'm kind of stressing the structure of the piece here, is that you want to think, how is this organized to be effective? Okay? So one example might be in something like tone. If the original is a funny piece, when you are writing a summary, the job of you as a summarizer is not to be funny, but to tell the reader that the original was funny. So you would say something like, the author uses humor to make the point. Okay? You don't have to tell jokes. You don't have to rehearse their jokes. You just say that they use humor. Okay? Or if the piece is very statistics heavy, if the person includes a lot of data and stuff, you don't necessarily have to include all that data. You can just say, the author uses a lot of statistical examples to make the point that such and such. Okay? So sometimes you can handle a lot of material in just a phrase or two in your writing. So as you progress through the article, you want to maintain what I call the distribution and the order of the original piece. That if someone spends a lot of time on statistics, you too should spend a lot of time on statistics. But that doesn't mean necessarily that your summary has to include a lot of statistical stuff. You can sometimes cut down what the original author uses as a lot of time by saying the author spends a lot of time doing statistical analysis. And you can actually compress, say, half an article into one phrase. And that's where you're kind of bending the rules a bit. Okay, that you don't have to spend as much time in your summary, but you indicate how the original spent a lot of time doing that. Because one of the anxieties that frequently comes up around summary, and I'm going to guess that most of you will encounter this, is you're going to get to a point where you're saying, how can I compress all of this stuff down into 400 words? That's impossible. Hear this every year, right? That's the challenge, right? So use those kinds of phrases, and those key words and key terms. You can say things like, the author begins here and then continues to do this and concludes by doing this. And during that time, you can say, the middle section of the author's piece spends a lot of time doing a statistical analysis which reveals this, and then concludes with some personal examples that do that. Okay? And you can draw attention to how the original is doing stuff without necessarily going through every single example. And that brings up another thing about examples, is that if the author is using a lot of examples, you have to kind of think, what are the important examples that I should highlight here? Are some examples more important than others? And this is the key process of selection, is that you have to read the piece and say, okay, what are the most important things that I need to convey here? So the big ideas, of course, are the ones that you want to capture. But when we get down to the finer points, the details, which details really make the point well? And which ones are perhaps secondary or unimportant that we can cut out? Okay? And if you're having trouble making those distinctions, that's okay. Then we think of different ways of handling it. We could say, the author uses 5 or 7 or whatever, several examples, one of which is this. So you could say, of the 9 examples the author uses, this is a representative example that makes the point. And you're using language that indicates that, yeah, there's lots of examples, and this is one that kind of does the same thing as all the others. Okay? But maybe there's a different organization of examples. Maybe, one example builds on the other, beginning with this example and following other examples which develop the point that is this. So there's lots of ways to handle this idea of importance or equal importance. Okay? So give it a go. See how far you get. See if you hit that wall of, I can't possibly turn this into 400 words. One couple of words of advice here. I've seen this happen, and I just want to steer you away from this, is that a summary is not just you blacking out bits of the original text and just leaving, snippets of the original. It's not a blackout text. You have to put it into your own words. And also, don't just go through and do a blackout text and then just paraphrase the blackout bits. Okay, that doesn't work either. So it's not a string of quotations, nor is it just a string of paraphrases. Okay, you want to create your own language. You don't want to sound like the original author, and that can sometimes be a challenge for some students, that you might read it and say, well, the original says it perfectly as you can. I can't possibly improve upon that. If you run into that problem, try this. Go to a friend or family member and try and tell them what the gist of the article is. Okay? You know, like go to your mom or something and say, Mom, I just read this article and here's what it says. And what you're going to find is you're going to start using your own language, because you can't remember the exact wording that the original used. So try it, if you don't have anybody around you, if you're in quarantine, try it on your dog, or try it to your reflection in the mirror, because we can't remember word for word everything that happens. Try and summarize it in your own words, and you will find yourself using your own words. If you find that difficult, back off and take a break. Okay, get some distance from it. Do it tomorrow. Okay, and you'll come back to it, and you won't remember exactly what it said, but you'll remember the big ideas, and you'll find yourself putting it into your own words. Okay, so the key points to remember here are: begin with a thesis statement, okay, and then continue in the order and distribution of the original, okay, and end where the original ends. Second thing is remain neutral and objective. Explain the original. Your opinion, your agreement or disagreement, like or dislike, should not enter into it. And the third thing is use your own words. Don't use the words of the original. It's okay to use key phrases and stuff. That's part of the exercise, key points. Maybe it's a definition of a key term or something. But you shouldn't use substantial repetition of phrases of the original. So as always, I'm available for consultation if you want to talk about how to do this assignment in more detail.